He said, I will not be complicit in genocide. That means he is holding his own government accountable in the most extreme way possible. To not get that right in a country that claims to be a democracy is really undermines the entire system in which we live. Well, Aaron Bushnell was a active duty U.S. member of the U.S. Air Force. He committed an act of extreme protest by setting himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. Before doing so, he live streamed the video, stated very clearly and almost disturbing how calmly he stated the purpose for what he was doing and what he was about to do. Before actually live streaming, he had sent this link. He had made sure that journalists would have access to this information in order to tell the story, because it was so important for him, obviously, given the extreme nature of the act that he, self-immolation is the most extreme form of protest. He clearly wanted to make sure that this message was seen by, especially, I think, an American populace, because he's an American himself and a member and an American service member. In the video, he stated clearly that he would no longer be complicit in genocide, referring to Gaza. And after setting himself on fire, in what you could hear if you listen to the video, in excruciating pain, he still yelled his last words, which were "Free Palestine." So there's a very clear reasoning behind this act. He said he was about to partake in an act of extreme protest, and actually said that, but compared to what Palestinians have been facing against their colonizers, against their oppressors, that it was not extreme. So this is very, very clear language that was used by Aaron Bushnell to explain why he did what he did. But when you saw the media coverage, especially this is in, mainstream Western media coverage, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Reuters, none of the headlines, and even initially none of the stories within the headlines, but then eventually they were updated to add some story and actually quote him. But none of the headlines said anything about the reason for his protest. They stated something like a man, a member of the U.S. Air Force, sets himself on fire in front of Israeli embassy. The headlines didn't use words like protest, the fact that this was a protest. They didn't use the words Gaza, genocide, Palestinian, free Palestine, basically any of the things he actually said, right? So the issue with that and how this fits into the larger way that this entire conflict has been framed throughout since October 7th is that, again, you see the erasure of Palestinians, right? They try to avoid the word Palestine or Palestinian. And so what happened with the story of Aaron is his intention and the reason for his action was completely erased. And the problem with that is that was the story. So there's several reasons why it's important to get Aaron's story right, to tell the story correctly. The first is that Aaron is an American. He's an average American, right? This is an ordinary person who took an extreme measure to draw attention to and protest against what his own government is doing. And that's very important, because what he was talking about wasn't just the actions of the state of Israel and what was happening to Palestinians. He said, I will not be complicit in genocide. That means he is holding his own government accountable in the most extreme way possible. To not get that right in a country that claims to be a democracy is really undermines the entire system in which we live. If he was protesting the actions of an adversarial state, if he did this for, say, Ukraine, the way that the media would have covered it would have been entirely different. Because essentially the role of the media has become to maintain the status quo, to maintain whatever is the policy position of the government at the time. And that's what we're doing and it's not about valorizing or glorifying the action that Aaron took. And there's a lot of people who have tried to pathologize him and say, well, this is a case of a mental illness or someone who was in distress. I don't think that we can all decide all of a sudden we're all PhDs in psychology and we can diagnose his actions. I think what we can all agree on is that he was clearly in distress. But what was missing in the stories was the reason why he was distressed. He was distressed because he told us the reason behind it, because of what we witnessed. And I think that's why it's so important to get the story right. There's a lack of humanity in the way that this narrative has been framed in the Western media, a lack of humanity for Palestinians and even those who advocate for Palestinians, like Aaron. And this is a process of dehumanization that makes atrocities possible. We learn about these atrocities in history, and we think about how is it possible that this happened at that time? And yet we are living through an atrocity right now, and we're seeing how it's possible. It's possible when you dehumanize people. It's possible when an entire people, the Palestinians, have been dehumanized. And by not telling Aaron's story correctly, you are dehumanizing the advocates of Palestinians as well. And to have to go to that extent is really, to me, tarnishes not only the reputation of the media, but shows how deeply ingrained these ideas are within our society that we have to go to such lengths simply not to humanize a group of people.